Hello, scholars. Today we're going to be continuing our background dive into the Crusades. This time we are going way back in time. We're going to be looking at the ancient Greeks. And I promise you by the end I will have tied this into the Crusades. But hold on, because we're going to take a deep dive into ancient Greece. We're going to start today by looking at the very beginning of what you probably studied with ancient Greece, that is the Greek city-states. They arose around the Aegean Sea, right here, there we go, in the 8th century BC. There had been settlements prior to that, but this is where they really become city-states as we have defined city-states in this class. They developed based upon trade, and early on they really were competing with each other. They shared a common language, a common culture. There was definitely a definitive Greek society, but these different cities competed with each other. So they were both unified by culture and separated by location. Over time, we see the development of two of these city-states really starting to lead the group. We have Athens and we have Sparta, who are dominating this Greek division. We actually have the Peloponnesian Wars, a series of wars between Athens and Sparta for dominance in Greece. We have Athens right here and Sparta over here. Now, these Greeks did tend to unite when faced with a foreign threat. And boy, oh boy, did the ancient Greek city-states face a foreign threat when Persia, this big bad boy over here, mustered together an invasion force to push their empire further west and invaded little old Greece right here. But they found that the Greeks were an awful tough opponent, especially when those the Athenians and the Spartans could unite. Once the Persian Empire was pushed back, actually they were pushed back a couple of times, the Greeks actually just returned to infighting. Once they didn't have the Persians to fight anymore, they decided to fight against themselves. The northern Greek kingdom of Macedon is able to take advantage of some of this disunity, and under the powerful leadership of Philip of Macedon, guy on this coin down here, Philip II, Philip of Macedon, was able to unite Greece under Macedonian rule. Macedonia was Greek in language and culture, but not a city-state. And they were able to assert their dominance over the Greek city-states when they didn't stop their infighting after the Persian invasion. Now, Alexander the Great is the son of Philip the Macedon. And as great and wonderful of a leader as Philip of Macedon was, Alexander the Great is the guy that we all know when we study ancient Greeks. Alexander realized that the power of a united Greece was incredible. And if the Greeks could just stop fighting each other, so how could he do that? Well, he would unite them against a common enemy. And what better common enemy than their old enemy, the Persians? If you don't ever want to be invaded by the Persians again, what you need to do is you need to go out and conquer their empire. Now, this sounds a little bit crazy because, again, we're talking about little old Macedonia, Greece right here, and big old Persian Empire, but that is exactly what Alexander does. He marshals the Greek forces, marches out across ancient Persia, and in just over 13 years of rule, Alexander is able to create a massive Greek empire. Everything basically in this lighter shade of red right here becomes a Greek conquest under Alexander the Great. You can see a nice little outline of the United States of America surrounding that. So you can really see he's conquering an area that east to west was wider than the United States is today, and north to south was about the same as the United States today. Now, not the same square mileage, but we're talking about a massive ancient kingdom. Well, now we're going to get into philosophy. I mentioned philosophy in our last lesson and about how Islam was able to bring Greek philosophy back to Europe. So let's talk about these Greek philosophers for a moment. Aristotle, probably the most influential of the time, and really most influential period, was a tutor and advisor of Alexander the Great. He's considered one of the greatest scientists and philosophers of his time. He's considered one of the greatest philosophers and scientists ever, despite the fact that much of his science has now been disproven. He does establish this culture of science, which has continued in the Greek culture and then later the Greco-Roman culture. And many today consider Aristotle to be the first true scientist. There's a lot of evidence to support that. There's evidence opposed to that, but he's in that category. He may very well have been the very first, and he was a tutor of Alexander the Great. Many attribute some of Alexander's success to Aristotle. But Aristotle's success came from somebody else as well, because Aristotle was a student of Plato. If you know anything about ancient Greece and ancient Greek philosophy, we need to know Plato. And Aristotle was his student. And Plato was the leading philosopher of Athens. And he created the very first institution of higher learning. Today we would call it a college or a university. Back then they didn't use those terms. But this was an institution of higher learning. It was an academy created by Plato to foster the education of brilliant young people such as Aristotle. Now, Plato himself was a student of another great Greek thinker, Socrates. Socrates gets the ball rolling with Greek philosophy by teaching that you can best find what is true, best find truth by systematically eliminating untruths. You want to know what's true, you want to know what's real, you want to know what the solution to your problem is, find out the things that definitely aren't. And you can start to narrow down your list of possibilities to what is the answer. This later encourages people like Isaac Newton to formulate the scientific method. But really it grew out of a discussion format, the Socratic method or the Socratic method that comes from Socrates. So we have Socrates who teaches Plato, Plato who teaches Aristotle, Aristotle who teaches Alexander the Great, Alexander the Great who conquers the Persian Empire. Wow, what a connection. So I did say we would tie this in somehow to our crusades and where we're at in our story. So here we go. What we are talking about is the spread of Hellenistic culture. Hellenistic, simply that term, just means that it is from the Hellenes. The Hellenes were the Greeks. So the Hellenistic culture is Greek culture. And it was spread by Alexander the Great. And when his empire expanded, Greek culture expanded. And pretty soon we have Greek language and Greek architecture and Greek pastimes, the Olympics and sports and athletic competitions such as that, spread out throughout the Greek Empire. And this is in all areas controlled by the Greeks. Now, here's a look at our world again. We've got what later becomes the Seleucids, which was one of Alexander the Great's generals, and Ptolemaics. Ptolemy was another one of those. And then we've got the Greek city-states themselves, which are going to be ruled by the Macedonian line. All of these areas take on this Hellenistic culture. And that culture strongly influences the Byzantine Empire. Notice it covers kind of the same area. So the Byzantines were Greek in language, they were Greek in culture, they were Greek in thought. This is why we talk about this period as kind of this Greco-Roman. Yes, they identified with the Roman Empire. Yes, they considered themselves Romans, but they also considered themselves Greeks. And they very much were Greeks. And the further they get from the West, the more they're going to associate with this Greek culture and this Greek heritage. And this division between East and West is going to continue along these linguistic cultural lines, with the Latins following more the Roman tradition and the Byzantines following more that Greek tradition. So this is where we are today, with the Byzantines as a highly developed, Romanized Greek culture. Next time, we're going to look a little bit more in depth at the Islamic Empire so that we can understand all the players in our coming crusade. We've talked a lot about the West, covered a little bit of Byzantine. We haven't done justice to the Islamic Empire, so next time we're going to do that, and then we can dive in to some social bloodies. I'll see you next time.